Connected to David SQ2 Ultra. Connected to Sprint iPhone.
Jamming tank mind, especially since it's a Nobel Prize winning book for literature. This is literature. What is this, philosophy or literature, or what kind of book is that? What's funny, it says fiction literature. It's unusual. This is fiction, so what you're doing is fiction. Yeah. It's fictitious, so wait a minute. Thought this was serious stuff, but, well, everything I do is both serious and amusing, okay? The faces of the listeners at these congresses, it's about Congress, what's happening in Congress. The faces of the listeners at these congresses were not completely legible. Page 13. For the art of masking one's feelings had already been perfected to a considerable degree. So, most people learn to mask their feelings to a considerable degree, and still one was aware of successive waves of emotion. Anger, fear, amazement, distrust, and finally thoughtfulness. I had the impression that I was participating in a demonstration of mass hypnosis. I have been participating in the demonstrations at the universities over what's happening in Gaza and with the protesters. I've been staying home and protesting at home over protesting a protest about the protester. I'm protesting against my mass hypnosis, that I was hypnotized and I had the impression that I was participating in a demonstration of mass hypnosis. Sometimes I believe everything I read in the New York Times, and I'm hypnotized, and sometimes they have videos on YouTube and stuff. These people could laugh and joke afterwards in the quarters, but the harpoon had hit its mark. And it had hit me, but the harpoon had hit its mark, and henceforth, wherever they may go, they will always carry it with them. Do I believe that the dialectic of the speakers was unanswerable? Yet, as long as there was no fundamental discussion of methodology, there's no real fundamental discussion of my methodology in this podcast. No one amongst those present was prepared for such a discussion. It would probably have been a debate on Hegel, whose reading public was not made up of painters and writers. Moreover, even if someone had wanted to start it, he would have been silenced. For such discussions are permitted, and even then, fearfully, only in the upper circles of the party. Okay, so can you have a discussion, except for in the upper circles of the party? That's like we're talking about in China with the Communist Party. These artists... This is on the political side now with the pill of Murray Bing, and there's I'm reading from Melos. These artist congresses reveal the inequity between the weapons of the dialectician and those of his adversary. A match between the two is like a duel between a foot soldier and a tank. Huh. Right now, yeah, they have these, they adjusted the tanks, and they did something to the tanks to jam the drones, so it's happening in Ukraine, the Russians. They do have this, I saw somewhere in the paper, they have these drone jamming tanks, and the Russians do now. So they're advancing a bit on the front line. But not that every and I'm still fighting the war against totalitarianism in this book, in The Captive Mind. By reading this book, I'm fighting the equivalent of like a million soldiers. Okay. So through ideological warfare, you're fighting in the war? Yeah. So I fight back by reading this book. Okay. Not that every dialectician is very intelligent. Yeah, and I'm not necessarily that intelligent, but I'm not necessarily very intelligent or very well educated. And I'm not even well educated in this kind of stuff, or political science and history, and I have never read this book up to now. You read a book which you don't even know what you're reading, you're crazy. Yeah, and I'm half crazy, so I admit it. So, not that every dialectician is very intelligent or so very well educated, but all his statements are enriched. And my statements are enriched by my deep meditation. I meditate before doing this reading. But all his statements are enriched by the accumulated thought of the masters and their commentators. But I do have the accumulated thought of the master. If every sentence he speaks is compact and effective, that is not due to his own merits. Yeah, well, I'm doing the will of God in this podcast. It's not due to my own merit, and I didn't even select this reading, and I don't make up, I don't plan the podcast and all that stuff. If every sentence he speaks is compact and effective, that is not due to his own merits, but to those of the classics he has studied. Yeah, so the merit I have in this podcast is due to the classics I have studied. They're due to the accumulation of the different podcasts and the different books and the different meditations and to the gurus and to the Satgurus. Okay. Wait a minute, so it's due to God himself, yeah. If every sentence he speaks is compact and effective, that is not due to his own merits, but to those of the classics he has studied. Yeah. So, no comida, no food. I try to give merit to these classics that I have studied. A lot of them are classics, and a lot of them are Nobel Prize-winning pieces of literature. Okay. Well, why is that? Isn't Nobel sort of like a woke kind of organization, or is it Western, or is it just a more Western intellectualism or something? So what's so great about that? Well, we're trying to find out in this warfare of this podcast in Russian. So if I could get it simultaneously translated to Russian, it might help in the war. His listeners are defenseless, and my listeners are defenseless. They could, it is true, resort to arguments derived from their observations of life, but such arguments are just as badly countenanced as any questioning of fundamental methodology. The dialectician rubs up against his public in this podcast at innumerable meetings of professional organizations and youth groups in clubs, factories, office buildings, and village huts throughout the entire converted area of Europe. Yeah, I rub up against all the different areas in Europe right now, even though I'm not even in Europe. But when you go into Europe, well, yeah, my travel plans are like really kind of screwed up. And what happened to you? Well, and there is no doubt that he emerges the victor in these encounters. It is no wonder that a writer or painter or podcaster or poet or musician or pianist, a writer or painter or tennis player doubts the wisdom of resistance. Yeah, if he were sure that art opposed to the official line could have lasting value, if he was sure of it. Yeah, I'm not sure if this podcast has any lasting value, but some of my piano pieces, like the Chopin Nocturnes, they have at least 450 views, and if that's even lasting value, he probably would not hesitate. If he were sure the art opposed to the official line could have a lasting value, he probably would not hesitate. He would earn his living through some more menial job within his profession, write or paint in his spare time, and never worry about publishing or exhibiting his work. Yeah, well, I don't earn a living through some menial job, and I don't earn a living through writing and playing the piano or playing tennis or anything else either. So I never worry about publishing or exhibiting his work. I'm not worried about it, and I'm also not earning anything. Oh, then what the hell's going on with you? Is your wife working, or is she making lasagna? Yeah, well, he believes, however, that in most cases such work would be artistically poor, and he is not far wrong, as we have already said. The objective conditions he once knew have disappeared. Well, what's happened is most of the high culture and what is it, high culture or highbrow stuff we've talked about in the other podcast about yoga, how the highbrow maybe just meant between the eyebrows and the third eye, but the objective conditions aren't that good. As we have already said, the objective conditions he once knew have disappeared. The objective conditions necessary to the realization of a work of art are, as we know, highly complex phenomenon involving one's public, the possibility of contact with it. Maury, what's going on? Did you do auras, or are you doing work, cooking, or? I don't know. What do we have today? No chocolate? Or no cooking? No comida? You eating? You say no comida, Tom? If all this doesn't eat, I'm not eating either. It's like no comida. All right. You know eat everything.
Pero nothing. No coffee, no tea, nothing.
When I'm having, I have coffee, I'm not trying to eat. All or nothing. She cooks and eats nothing. So I'm following in her footsteps. Nothingness. This is a form of nothingness, annihilation in this podcast. I'm trying to annihilate this podcast by not eating in the podcast, okay? You don't like it? God, I'll organize. More Davey organize. It's okay. Davey organize it. More. That's something for Mike, for the organization of the net, the tennis and contract. It's supposed to be for making it's supposed to normally at Normalmente it's in the car and touchy, but I'm not. What's the syrup? Oh, she's cleaning up my mess now. Because I took out of the car because we need room in the car. I have baby, okay, clean it up. Okay. When I get to I take everything out of the car, so I haul around. So the objective conditions we once knew have disappeared. I can't podcast as I would like to. I can't write as I would like to, quote. A young Polish poet admitted to me, my own stream of thought has so many tributaries that I barely succeed in damming up off one. When a second book or a third book or a fourth book overflows into this podcast, what happened? Why are you not able to focus on both? Haven't you obtained your mind and on your journey in this podcast? Yeah, I was really easier times. People, they talk about when did everything turn into a journey? Yeah, and why did you turn everything in your life into a journey, into this podcast? Yeah. Are you on like a weight loss journey or a spiritual journey? Meditation journey? What journey? Did you check the linguistic statistics on the use of the word journey? All these things
You a master? Supreme Master?
Yeah, man. Good seeing you, man.
You Supreme Master? You guys are known?
Huh?
You playing? What happened?
I played 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock? What's at 10 o'clock?
linguistic professor who did quantitative linguistics in this podcast.
What the hell?
To use words in this podcast. So I'm using words to make this podcast. I got halfway through a phrase and already I admit it to Marxist criticism. I submit it to Marxist criticism. Yeah. That's very similar to submitting it to woke philosophy and having students or the professors at the university
Too far.
criticize this podcast.
Don't
okay?
criticize the podcast.
I'm on page 15 again of
Don't criticize.
Captive Mind, and I'm critically submitting this podcast to Marxist criticism. I get halfway through a phrase, and already I submit it to Marxist criticism. What's that about? It's not old-fashioned. I thought people were tired of Marxist criticism. And they're actually criticizing Marxism. Or they're criticizing Marxist criticism, yeah. I imagine what X or Y will say about it, and I change the ending. So I kind of imagine what people will think about this podcast, and I change it. Okay. Paradoxical as it may seem, it is the subjective importance that convinces the intellectual that the one method is right. Yeah, so I'm convinced that my method is right. So everything proves it is right. Dialectics. I predict the house will burn. Then I pour gas over the stove. Yeah, I figure I can predict what's going to happen. So I just pour gasoline onto what I think in this podcast. Okay. The house burns. My prediction is fulfilled. Yeah, most of what I predict has been coming about. So I still claim to be the best podcaster, the highest prophet, and the best critic, and in all areas, including philosophy and politics, everything. So dialectics, I predict that a work of art is incompatible with the socialist realism. The socialist realism will be worthless. I predict that a work of art incompatible with socialist realism will be worthless. Then I place the artist in conditions in which such a work is worthless. My prediction is fulfilled. Yeah, and a lot of things are. Some of the art stuff in the art section that I see in the New York Times is actually worthless stuff. So what happened? So you don't run out to the galleries and take a look at the stuff. But I thought you liked the Met Museum and you go there. Yeah, well, I do like art. But my prediction is that some of the stuff is worthless. Okay. Is that true in music too? But I thought you wanted to go to Carnegie Hall and Met Opera and all these things. Yeah. Let us take poetry as an example. Obviously, there is poetry of political significance. Lyric poetry is permitted to exist on certain conditions. It must be one, serene, free of any elements of thought that might transgress against the universally accepted principles and practices comes down to descriptions of nature and of one's feelings for the friends and family. 3, understandable, since a poet who is not allowed to think in his verse automatically tends to perfect his form. He is accused of formalism. It is not only the literature and painting of the people's democracies that prove to the intellectual that things cannot be different. He is strengthened in this belief by the news that seeps through from the West. Yeah, sometimes when this guy was getting news that seeped through from the West, like sometimes the news of the West may seep through into Russia or to China, so it's hard to keep it from seeping through. Okay. The Western world is the world of Witz's novel. The number of its Aesthetic and philosophical aberrations is myriad. Disciples imitate disciples. The past imitates the past. Yeah, and I have the past podcast imitate my future podcast. This world lives as if there had never been a Second World War. Yeah, and in some ways the war going on in Ukraine is sort of like there never was a Second World War. Okay. Intellectual clans in Eastern Europe know this life, but know it as a stage of the past that isn't worth looking back on, even if the new problems are so oppressive that they can break a great many people. At least they are. Contemporary and mental discipline and the obligation to be clear are undoubtedly precious. The work of really fine Western scholars and artists escapes notice. The only new names that are known are those of Democrats, a delicate circumlocation for a non-pagan. In short, the recompense for all pain is the certainty that one belongs to the new and conquering world, even though it is not nearly so comfortable and joyous a world as its propaganda would have one think. I'm reading about success now. Success is a buzzword also, not just journey. Okay, page 16, from the captive mind. Mystery shrouds the political moves determined on high in this distant center, Moscow. People speak about prominent figures in hushed voices. Well, a lot of the people in Russia will speak about Putin, but they have to speak in a hushed voice, especially if they're critical. In the vast expanses of Europe, Eurasia, whole nations can vanish without leaving a trace. Yeah, and sometimes he's trying to cause nations to vanish and be absorbed into the Soviet Empire. Armies number in the millions. Terror becomes socially useful and effective. So, yeah, for terror, like you could use it like terror in you knock out like power plants. You can terrorize even the civilians, whether it be Ukraine or Kharkiv, or you could do it in Gaza Strip or something. Terror becomes socially useful and effective. Yeah, the Hamas used terror, and they felt that it was going to be effective when they used it in Israel. So I thought they started it right, yeah. Terror becomes socially useful and effective. There you go. It is. Philosophers rule the state. Yeah, in reality, like, philosophers rule the state. Obviously not philosophers in the traditional sense of the word. Yeah, it's not like Socrates, it's other kinds of philosophers. But dialecticians, yeah, but it's podcasters that really rule the state, like myself. Okay. Why is it you rule the state? I mean, I know you train AI bots, and you're training the chat bots, and they're learning about this stuff, and they're planning to take over the world. Yeah. Dialecticians or chatbot trainers or podcasters rule the state. The conviction grows that the whole world will be conquered by AI. Great hordes of followers appear on all the continents. Lies are concocted from seeds of truth. The philosophically uneducated bourgeois enemy is despised for his inherited inability to think. Yeah, I despise the bourgeois people who are uneducated. And since they're so frickin' bourgeois and so dumb that they have to be ruled by smart AI bots because they just don't get their act together. The philosophically uneducated bourgeois enemy is despised for his inherited inability to think. Yeah, well, if he hasn't developed any personal culture, he hasn't become a vegetarian, maybe he hasn't learned how to meditate, and he's an uneducated bourgeois enemy, okay? Classes condemned by the laws of history perish because their minds are paralyzed. Well, technically their minds don't work, I guess. The boundaries of the empire move steadily and systematically westward. So what's happening is the Russians are trying to move the boundary systematically westward. They're trying to recover the Soviet Empire. That's why I'm reading this book as a defense against, philosophically that is, against the expansion of the Soviet Empire coming west and all that stuff. Okay, this is helpful. So you're helping the Ukrainians effectively in this podcast, yeah. Yeah, well, I'm helping us more than the Ukrainians. I'm helping people who are bourgeois and uneducated to get educated. Yeah, okay. The boundaries of the empire move steadily and systematically westward. Yeah, and a lot of people, even in the United States, like they move, like, let's say, from the East Coast to the West, and they move. Yeah. Unparalleled sums of money are spent on scientific research, and they spent so much money on warfare and figuring out how to evade drones and jam the drones and all these things. Unparalleled amounts of money. One prepares to rule all the people of the earth. Why are we preparing? One prepares to rule all the people of the earth. Is all this too little? Surely this is enough to fascinate the intellectual. As he beholds these things, historical fatalism takes root in him. In a rare moment of sincerity, he may confess cynically, quote, I bet on this horse. He's good. He'll carry me far, unquote. So some people, they're betting on either Biden, or they may bet on Trump, or they bet on Macron, or some bet on Putin, and others that bet on Modi in India. And are you betting? Do you have horse betting, or do you do political gambling, or trade the stock market, or what's going on these days? I don't know. A patient has a hard time, however, when the moment comes for him to swallow Murdy Bing in its entirety. Yeah, I haven't swallowed any blue pills when I was playing tennis in any tournament. I didn't do doping. I'm just trying to get physically stronger, trying to get a better player, and practice, basically. So he becomes such a nervous wreck that he may actually fall ill. He knows it means a definitive parting with his former self, his former titles. So if he is a writer, he cannot hold a pencil in his hand. The whole world seems dark and hopeless until now. Paid a minimal tribute. In his articles and novels, he described the evils of capitalist society. Well, there could be evils, I guess. Are there evils from capitalistic society? Yeah, it's amazing they were saying how since Super Size Me came out 20 years ago and about the Super Size with the McDonald's, and then they said that 20 years had passed and McDonald's still had outperformed by something like double or something. S&P 500 or whatever it is. It was in the New York Times, and those people still demand for fast food, and people are eating it fast. Okay, they're still fast about eating fast food? Yeah, the evils of capitalistic society. And what? Did you get supersized? Yeah, they get Morgan Spurlock. I can't believe it's 20 years since Super Size Me came out, and I tried to stop eating too much. What? Did you 20 years ago try not to supersize yourself? Yeah, I tried to become a minimalist with respect to my physical. I started a journey, a weight loss journey. Oh, is that your journey? Oh. Yeah, I was on the weight. I thought you used that word journey like it's so cliche. But were you involved with the evils of capitalistic society? Yeah, well, you could argue. I guess you could argue a hamburger is an evil of capitalistic society. What about the French fries? Yeah. I still can't believe 20 years have passed. It shows that I am an evil person in a capitalistic society myself. Okay. But after all, it isn't difficult to criticize capitalism, and it can be done honestly. Yeah, and the thing is, when I criticize capitalism, at least I'm doing it honestly. Okay. So you're an honest podcaster when you criticize, the charlatans of the stock exchange, the feudal veterans and self-deluding artists, and the instigators of nationalistic wars are figures who lend themselves readily to the pen. But now he must begin to approve. In official terminology, this is known as the transition from the stage of critical realism to that of social realism. It occurred in the newly established People's Democracies about the year 1950. Yeah, the funny thing is this book is actually written in 1951. So I'm creating an illusion that it's a current event. You're playing games with our head in this podcast, The operation he must perform on himself is one that some of his friends have already undergone. More or less painfully, they shake their heads sympathetically, knowing the process and its outcome. Quote, I have passed the crisis, they say sincerely. Quote, but how he is suffering. He sits at home all day with his head in his hands. Yeah, well, I sit at home. Yeah, it was funny, I was making fun of him. I was going to mock the people. I actually sent 13 requests for a fourth player to the tennis court. I literally didn't get it. What happened to you? Yeah, we went to the tennis. It was a rainy day, so you would think that somebody would want to join us. But we went and played at the USTA Tennis Center with 3 people. Because nobody bid on it, even on a rainy day. I was saying, they sit at home all day with his head in his hands. They sat at home and got gordo and fat and didn't go to the tennis center. So I don't know what happened. How do you know they're working intention? The hardest thing to conquer is his feeling of guilt, no matter what his convictions. Every man in the countries of which I speak is a part of an ancient civilization. His parents were attached to religion, or at least regarded it with respect. Yeah, my parents were attached to religion and regarded it with respect. Yeah, and there's still the church there, and then next to the church is the cemetery where my parents are, which is at a church, and the cemetery is next to the church. Okay, so and they regarded it with respect. In school, much attention was devoted to his religious upbringing. And they had devoted some attention to my religious upbringing. So I was